Welcome back to Deception Reports. For years, Americans believed the housing market was backed by two rock-solid institutions. They bought homes, took mortgages, and trusted the system. But behind the scenes, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were quietly manipulating their numbers, not to survive, but to protect executive bonuses, stock prices, and political power. This isn't a story about a sudden collapse. It's about years of deliberate accounting fraud hidden in plain sight, while regulators, politicians, and Wall Street looked the other way. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were not ordinary companies. They were government-sponsored enterprises, created to make housing affordable by buying mortgages from banks and keeping money flowing. By the early 2000s, these two entities owned or guaranteed more than half of all U.S. home mortgages. They were considered too important to fail. That belief became their shield and their weapon. What followed was one of the largest accounting scandals in American financial history. A scandal that exposed how political influence, weak regulation, and executive greed combined to distort financial reality. The scandal began quietly in the late 1990s and early 2000s, when executives inside Fannie Mae realized Wall Street's expectations were unforgiving. Missing earnings targets by even a penny could send stock prices down and threaten executive compensation. Instead of accepting volatility, senior leadership chose manipulation. At the center of the scandal was earnings smoothing, deliberately shifting profits between quarters and years to create the illusion of steady, predictable growth. This was done by abusing complex accounting rules related to derivatives, hedging, and loan loss reserves. These weren't minor technical errors. They were systematic, intentional decisions approved at the highest levels. At Fannie Mae, executives exploited accounting standards to delay recognizing losses and accelerate gains. Internal documents later showed that accounting decisions were made backward. Executives decided the earnings number first, then forced accountants to justify it. The man at the top was Franklin Raines, a former Clinton administration official who served as CEO from 1999 to 2004. Under his leadership, Fannie Mae consistently hit earnings targets with suspicious precision. When internal staff raised concerns, they were ignored, pressured, or sidelined. Bonuses flowed upward tens of millions of dollars tied directly to manipulated performance metrics. In 2003, the first major crack appeared when Freddie Mac was forced to restate $5 billion in earnings, admitting that it had misstated profits for years. That revelation should have triggered immediate scrutiny of Fannie Mae. Instead, political pressure slowed everything down. Only after mounting evidence did the Office of Federal Housing Enterprise Oversight (OFEO) step in. In 2004, regulators released a devastating report accusing Fannie Mae of pervasive accounting manipulation, weak internal controls, and a culture that prioritized earnings targets over legal compliance. The consequences were massive. Fannie Mae was forced to restate over $6.3 billion in earnings. Executives were removed. Franklin Raines resigned under pressure, later agreeing to forfeit compensation. The company paid $400 million in civil penalties, one of the largest ever imposed at the time. Freddie Mac faced similar consequences. Its former CEO Leland Brenzel and other executives were barred from serving as officers. Both institutions were exposed as fundamentally dishonest in how they reported financial health. But here's the uncomfortable truth. No senior executive went to prison. This wasn't just accounting fraud. It was a systemic failure of oversight. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac used their political influence to intimidate regulators, silence critics, and shape public narratives. They presented themselves as public servants while operating like aggressive hedge funds. More dangerously, the false stability they projected helped inflate confidence in the U.S. housing market. Investors believed risks were under control. They weren't. When the housing market collapsed in 2008, these same institutions required a taxpayer bailout exceeding $190 billion, one of the largest rescues in U.S. history. The accounting scandal didn't cause the financial crisis, but it laid the groundwork by hiding risk, rewarding recklessness, and normalizing deception at the heart of the mortgage system. The Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac accounting scandal proves something deeply uncomfortable. Fraud doesn't always wear a criminal mask. Sometimes it wears a suit, sits in boardrooms, and speaks the language of public service. The numbers were fake, the profits were staged. The accountability was minimal, and the bilas always was paid by ordinary Americans. This wasn't a failure of accounting rules. It was a failure of courage, regulation, and honesty. At the highest levels of US finance, and the most dangerous part, the system that allowed it still exists. So the next time someone tells you the 2008 financial crisis was an accident, remember this story. Remember how Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac hid losses, manipulated accounting, and painted a false picture of stability while the risk kept growing underneath. This wasn't just bad math. It was deception at the highest level, protected by power, ignored by regulators, and paid for by the American public. Executives walked away with bonuses. Institutions survived, and ordinary people were left with the consequences. And that's the real pattern you should be watching for, not just in this case, but across the financial system. If you think this was a one-time scandal, you're wrong. If you think it can't happen again, you're not paying attention. This is why this channel exists, to expose what powerful institutions want forgotten. If you value truth over headlines, subscribe to Deception Read. More stories like this are coming because deception doesn't disappear. It just changes its shape. See you in the next report.